Hi, everybody. Welcome. Let me unmute our guest.
This guy is telling him to leave her neighborhood, apparently because he took a photo of a home from the street.
We could go upstairs, I guess.
Okay. So thank you all for being here tonight to have this really important conversation on systemic racism. And we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter movement. We're going to talk about the monumental legislation that just passed, 217, enhancing law enforcement integrity. And I just want first say that I'm Sally Boccella, and I'm the Democratic nominee for Senate District 23. I'm so honored and humbled to be your nominee going into the general. And to learn more about me, please visit my website at sallyforcolorado.com. It's right behind me, and it's also in the chat. And please, if you're able, please make a donation. We, in this COVID environment, will not be able to knock on doors like we're used to. So we'll be using digital and mailers and all kinds of innovative ways to reach voters. So every contribution helps us get there. And I'd like to now introduce my special guests. They are three powerhouse, strong, inspiring women. First, I'd like to introduce Senator Julie Gonzalez.
Hey, everybody.
Please tell us a little bit about the committees that you represent and a little bit about yourself briefly.
Certainly. I'm so excited to be here and to engage in this conversation. My name is Julie Gonzalez. I represent Northwest and Downtown Denver in the state Senate. I was elected in 2018, and I serve as the chair of the Finance Committee and the vice chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm also a member of our Appropriations Committee. And prior to joining the state legislature, my work has focused on the intersection of affordable housing, around achieving educational justice, and really fighting for immigrant rights. And so that's been a lot of the work that I carry at the Capitol. And I am very excited for this conversation today that we will be having. I do think that the work that you are doing, Sally, in convening this conversation is critically important. I just really respect that. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you here. Thank you. I'd also like to introduce Representative Leslie Herod. Leslie, tell us a little bit about all the committees that you're on, and that you're also a co-sponsor on the new innovative policy that just got passed on 217 that we'll be talking about tonight.
Well, thank you. So I'm State Representative Leslie Herod. Hello, everyone, especially Erica. Good to see you. We miss you down here. I am proud to be a member of the Colorado General Assembly, the House. I chair the Finance Committee, I vice chair the Judiciary Committee, and I'm also the chair of the Black Caucus. I really work in the intersection of race and justice in most of the work that I do at the Capitol. I think it's important to have an intersectional perspective and to ensure that every bill that we do really lifts up all of our communities, not just some. And so I'm also the first African-American LGBTQ person to hold elected office in Colorado. Proud not to be the last. As we know, we've gotten some other folks elected, and I'm just really excited to be able to grow that out. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation today. I am the prime sponsor of, oh, thanks, Adrian. I don't see, oh, you're hidden. Oh, and Jerry, hi. I know a lot of friends on here. Sorry. So I can't remember. Okay, so yes, I'm the prime sponsor of Senate Bill 217, and was really honored to be able to bring that bill forward directly because of the cries of the protesters. If we would not have heard from the protesters out in front of the Capitol, We would not have gotten this bill introduced or passed. I know because I had parts of the bill ready for introduction and couldn't get it introduced. And so I'm just so excited to be here. It's an honor to be here in this moment as a part of this movement, to be able to help move things forward in Colorado, and being the first in the nation to pass the Law Enforcement Integrity and Accountability Act was such an honor. But I could not have done it without my amazing co-prime sponsor, Serena Gonzales-Gutierrez. Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez was key in also making sure that this bill made it through the House. And it's just an honor to be able to link arms with our Latinx caucus to make this bill happen, and so many others. So with that, I'll let you back to it, Sally, but really it's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're part of this conversation. And I'd like to introduce Representative Serena Gonzales-Gutierrez. Please tell us a little bit about the committees that you represent, that you're on, and then also that you are the co-chair of the Latino Caucus.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Serena Gonzales-Gutierrez, and I represent House District 4, which is in Northwest, West, and Southwest Denver. So my district actually overlaps with Senator Gonzalez's district. I grew up in the district that I represent, so I am truly honored that I'm able to represent a place that I have deep roots in. My husband and I are also raising our 3 kids in the same neighborhood, the same district that we both grew up in. And so I really value that. The committees that I sit on I sit on Judiciary, House Judiciary with Representative Herod. And then I also sit on Public Health and Human Services. And so my background is really in child welfare and juvenile justice, and have been doing that work for over 17 years at this point, working with children, youth, and families that become involved in multiple systems. And so I've taken that knowledge base when it comes to systems and how they interact with the families that we serve and the community members, and been able to use that in the legislature in the types of policies that I have worked on. Which, similar to my lovely other panelists here, Senator Gonzalez and Representative Herod, you're both like right on the sides of me, so I could be like, hey, you're right here. I feel like we're like the Supremes or something, you know, we're like, anyway, or maybe more like Destiny's Child. I don't know who's more recent, a girl group. Anyway.
The Supremes rule, so that works.
So, you know, I work on a lot of justice-related type legislation, including as it relates to housing, as it relates to the environment, and as it relates to the criminal justice system, and you know, how we can better serve the people that are interfacing with these systems that predominantly, which is perfect topic for today's conversation, are people that come from low-income communities or communities of color. And so I think that, you know, that is super important. And I am also the co-chair of the Latino Caucus, the Democratic Latino Caucus. And Senator Rodriguez is my co-chair in the Senate. So we structure it so that we have one from the House and one from the Senate. So we're have both sides covered. And I see some friends here. I just want to say hi to Adrian. Adrian's in my district now. So thank you.
Yes, we miss Adrian. He left Weld County, but he's still an awesome supporter, an awesome engaged activist. And so, yes, we love Adrian. Thanks, Adrian, for being here. I wish you would show your face. We would love to see you. Oh, he says hi in the chat. Okay. So I'd like to get started. A couple things is the catalyst for this virtual town hall was because when the bill was introduced, and as we know, and I'd love for you to take us through how the bill, when a bill starts out, it's a rough draft, and then it gets put through committee. And then what happens in committee is that it gets challenged and amended. And then we come up with an amazing piece of legislation that the people vote on. And so the catalyst for this event was that a lot of my community members reached out to me, and they are married to law enforcement officers. And so they were concerned about the original state of the bill. And I think it's important that we address those things, how we want people in the community to get involved, and we want them to reach out to their elected officials and talk about the things that they like and they don't like about certain bills and why we are doing the things that we're doing. And I also want to make note too that this bill didn't just happen overnight. I mean, you've all been working on this for a while. Am I right? I mean, this is not something that like all of a sudden, you know, with the events that just happened, it came to, you know, like, oh yes, we have to pass it. But I mean, you've been working on this kind of legislation for a while, because this is not something that just happened recently. This has been ongoing. And even now, after George Floyd, we have so many more, which is so unbelievable that it's even still happening. So I really want to make note of that. And I would love to hear your perspectives on how this came about, and just a little bit more about 217, you know, a little bit more about how it came about, the really great points in it, and how it will actually protect law enforcement officers that walk in integrity and call out the ones that do not. And I will let you decide on who wants to go first. Leslie? Serena?
Okay, sure, I'll jump in. So, you know, let's see, I could talk about this bill for hours, I know, because I've done it recently, so I won't do that. But I will say that absolutely the bill was something that I personally had contemplated for months, specifically in relation to what happened with Elijah McClain and Devon Bailey down in Colorado Springs, which is where I grew up. And, you know, mostly military town. And I, you know, went to high school there, and my brother grew up there, and just thinking about, you know, how unsafe it can be for people in my community specifically, but also in, you know, the Latinx community, in low income communities, and communities really around the state. These are issues that are real and that affect us. So when I was looking to introduce the bill, I actually reached across the aisle right away and had a lot of decent Republican support on some of the concepts, and got a lot of help in thinking through, okay, well, this could work, this couldn't work, or this is actually a policy that we should never have on the books, or it's not on the books where I used to be, those kind of things, which are really helpful. But I didn't really have the support to introduce the bill because of COVID. And then also because we didn't know if we had actually Democratic support on a law enforcement bill. But law enforcement issues are issues that the General Assembly has worked on for a very long time. I want to say 2015, but then I was recently reached out to by Wellington Webb, who said, no, you're in the wrong decade. We've been working on this stuff for so much longer, which was really good to get their input as well. And so when we introduced the bill, we made sure that law enforcement saw the bill before it was introduced. Now, granted, not a lot of leeway or head time, but that's just kind of how it goes, right? Like we don't have a lot of time in the General Assembly. We can pass bills in 3 days, 3 days. And in fact, there were multiple bills that were introduced after our bill that passed. But we did send it to them first and ask for, you know, what do you think we should tweak? You know, as long as you're good, you're here in good faith, as long as you're not just trying to kill the bill, because that's not something that we're interested in right now. But if you want to make this bill stronger, please come to the table and send us suggestions. And that's what they did. And that's why it was so important, I think, to have voices at the table who directly represent law enforcement. Now, we didn't take every idea.
Absolutely. I think that's how innovative policy happens, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
It's collaborative policy.
It is.
Right? But, and I'll pass it over to my colleagues to talk about the bill so I don't monopolize the time. But one thing I want to say is that I've been working with Republicans across the aisle on bills related to law enforcement since I stepped into the Capitol. So one of my first big bills I worked on was to rein in asset forfeiture. And what I learned is that it's not just the Black community that feels targeted by unlawful police officers, you know, or police officers who abuse their authority. In rural Colorado, it happens just as much, right? In other communities, it happens just as much. And so I worked with that almost Republican libertarian arm back then to pass asset forfeiture. So I went back to them to say, you know, can we work together on this bill? And to be honest, to my surprise, at the end of the day, they voted for the bill. And that was such a great honor to see, but they also quietly helped me along the way. And I'm just so proud to have their support. But we did intentionally introduce the bill and do the amendments in the public eye. And I think Senator Gonzalez will talk about this more because she really stated it so well in committee. Like, this is the place in the public, out in the open, to debate and to negotiate, because that's how we make the best policy. And she said that in committee, and it just really stuck with me. And it's absolutely the truth. So I'll pass it over to my colleagues. But before I do that, I just want to say hi to Representative Young. Thanks for being here as well. Good to see you. So thanks.
Hi, Mary.
Mary.
I'm just going to add real quick. I have my 3 kids, like I said, and it's, you know, smack dab 6 o'clock. So of course everybody's like all over the house and wanting cake and all kinds of things. So that's
Hey, no worries. I mean, Representative Gray, that's how he does these things, and it works. So no worries. We all know.
Talking to them and telling them to stop doing that. I'm going to talk to you to be quiet. So I just wanted to add something real quick because I think Representative Herod covered it really well. You know, just around, you know, what you mentioned earlier, Sally, like these were not new ideas that just popped up out of, you know, because of the recent murder of George Floyd. These were ideas and policies that had been discussed prior. You know, Representative Herod had been trying to work on some of these things, but as she mentioned, there were legislators before that. But there has also been a large amount of community work that has been going on for generations in trying to address the issues around police brutality. And so I just want to point that out, that this is, like I said, the types of things that, you know, law enforcement were doing and you know, amendments that Senator Gonzalez brought forward that are addressing directly those things when dealing with protesters, you know, those kinds of issues that have been going on for generations. You know, people being, you know, whether it was beat with a baton or tear gassed or being shot at with rubber bullets. And so these kinds of things, you know, I just am so honored to have been able to be a part of this, and the fact that we were able to bring this piece of legislation forward by Black and Brown legislators is something that I don't know that would have happened in a normal type of session and without the kind of push that we had from the community. So I just wanted to throw that out there and turn it over to Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you. You know, I'll just say that at the very beginning of this process, it was not we were not in a happy bipartisan space. I sat on the first committee. I sat on the State and Military and Veterans Affairs Committee in the Senate where the bill was first heard. And Senator Rhonda Fields and President Leroy Garcia were the Senate prime sponsors of the legislation. And I'll be honest, that hearing was contentious. And those of you in Weld County will know that your former sheriff, Senator Cook, was very frustrated about the bill. And there was this really interesting dialogue. And I'll just tell y'all a little bit of it. I'll share with y'all a little bit of that story because, you know, he and President Garcia got into this very interesting debate and dialogue where, you know, Senator Cook was at one point saying, you know, this is a bill that's against law enforcement. This is a shock, you know, and he was very upset about it. And President Garcia responded, well, you know, let's talk about the policy. Like, let's talk about what you would want to see in it. And I'll share with you, and I guess they'd had a private conversation just before the hearing. And he said, Senator Cook, as you know, as you and I spoke earlier, you shared that, yeah, I don't know what it's like to be in law enforcement. President Garcia was like, I have served in Afghanistan. I have served in the military. I am a Marine, and I am a paramedic as well. So I also understand first responders. But you're right. I don't know what it's like to be a frontline law enforcement official. He was like, but by the same token, you also don't know what it's like to be a person of color, right?
Mhm.
And I want to name that moment because that speaks to the importance of lived experience. It also speaks to the importance of listening to constituents and listening to everyone and to folks on opposite sides of the aisle, even when it's contentious, even when it's hard to be able to get good policy done. I will say that there was certainly could the Democrats have jammed this puppy through and, you know, forced it through and forced party line votes? Sure, we could have. I would argue that we would have ended up with less strong policy as a result. It was because, and I'm going to credit all four of the sponsors, but I particularly want to shout out Senator Rhonda Fields and President Garcia, because they kept the door open and they opened the door to Republicans and engaged in that dialogue and debate in order to say, how do we get y'all to yes, you know? And that's as much of part of the policy making process as anything else, right? And so there were amendments flying back and forth on that thing throughout every step of the way in the process. And I do want to echo both of my colleagues in saying that the fact that this policy, as big as it was able to be introduced, debated, and signed into law in a matter of days is really a testament to, one, the legislators, but truly, I will say it was community out front, either protesting, but also sending emails, calling us, writing, being engaged in the process, asking questions about amendments, participating in town halls like this. That was the work that gave us the space to actually keep those doors open and continue that dialogue. It was critically important. And that's really how this process is supposed to work. You put forward an idea, it goes to committee, you debate on it, and then assuming it moves forward in the process, people put forward amendments. You know, I put forward an amendment regarding use of rubber bullets and tear gas, right, on protesters, and changing the way that happens to ensure that we're protecting the rights of protesters to express their First Amendment.
And thank you so
rights.
much for that. Thank you.
And
that was horrible
absolutely.
to see that. Oh my gosh.
And that's the way that we make improvements to all of these policies. Now, a lot of love to Leslie and to Serena and to Leroy and to Rhonda for all of their work, but there still continues to be need for additional policies. And I don't think anyone on this call or anyone at the General Assembly would say that, cool, fix that, you know, check, you know, so
right.
there's a lot more work to do.
So that gives us a good segue. So knowing that this is the first step, right, into criminal justice reform, I would like to talk a little bit about, because, you know, the messaging on defund, quote unquote, I feel like is a trigger. It's negative. I mean, really what we're saying is we want to divest in certain aspects of law enforcement and invest in community and social services where the most good can be done in regards to mental health issues, you know, opioid or drug abuse or drug overdose. I mean, our law enforcement officers are trained to do one thing, and we're asking them to do all of these things. And I think that I would like to speak a little bit about that so that we can really inform our communities about what that actually means, instead of having, you know, there's no conversation because like I said, it's such a negative, it's like a negative vision, right? And then like, oh, I'm done. You know, you're not supporting law enforcement with that. And that's not the way I see it anyway. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that in that respect. Leslie, you want to go?
Sure. So, I would say that I don't know that some people don't mean completely defunding the police. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think there's a spectrum. I think some folks definitely want to completely defund the police and are abolitionists and do not want law enforcement in our communities and want to police our communities ourselves. That is a very real stance for a lot of people in the US, as we're talking about these issues. For me, I do believe in divestment. I do believe that we need to look at how we can reallocate our funding at the local level, the very local level, right? And ensure that we are funding more mental health and substance use services that are not attached to law enforcement at all. You shouldn't have to be in the system in order to get mental health and substance use care. Right? That shouldn't have to be the way that you go. But right now, because of our lack of funding, our lack of infrastructure, it just doesn't happen. And so, so what I've done in Denver is I actually ran a ballot measure called Caring for Denver, which asked for 25 cents on a $100 sales tax increase. We're now receiving about $35 million worth of mental health and substance use services in Denver every single year. We got our first amount of funding last year, so we're funding starting this year. In that initial grant funding, we were able to start a pilot project similar to an organization out in Eugene, Oregon called Cahoots. You guys know about Cahoots?
I do, yes.
Some.
But please tell us, because there's people that don't know.
Yeah, so I was able to go on a ride along with Cahoots. I do a lot of ride alongs, let me tell you. It's a fun way to spend a Saturday night if you're into that. But I do ride alongs really across the globe. I've done ride alongs. And I did a ride along with Cahoots, which was really interesting because in Eugene, Oregon, instead of calling 911 and automatically getting a law enforcement response, you can call 911, so no special number, right? And get a mental health professional and an EMT. And that way you have the right response for the incident. And what Cahoots does is they respond on scene, and I was with them once, and literally are able to spend hours on scene. They can stabilize someone, right? They can get them care without putting them in jail or even a 72-hour hold, which is terrifying, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're a mom and you call 911 because your child is in crisis, you don't expect them to leave in handcuffs, right? And you hope that they don't have to go into a 72-hour hold. What you want to do is get them care and make sure that they are not harming themselves or others and they're de-escalated. So I watched Cahoots do this with a man who was, I would say, looking at the home, it was definitely a suburban middle-class home, nice house, great yard, kid playing outside, white. And I go into his home and he's in the bathroom with a box cutter saying he's going to kill himself, unclothed, right? And won't come out. And then law enforcement actually did end up coming on scene, right? Because multiple people called. And when they showed up and they knew Cahoots was there, they were like, oh, good, you guys are here. Like, is everything good? Let me get the knife cutter out of the room. And then we're going to slowly back down the stairs. And I saw them back down the stairs. And I watched Cahoots get the man out voluntarily and sit on the couch. And then they kneeled down to his eye level and just started talking to him. And it was something that I really had never seen before. And by the time we left, he was talking with his wife. He had taken his medication. He was eating a sandwich, But at the end of the day, he actually didn't want to go to the ER or go anywhere anymore because the bills had piled up on his desk so high that he felt like he would do better for his family if he was just dead, right? And so we know that. We know that happens. We know that that's very real. So we need to have different responses. And so for me, divestment means funding things like that. Cahoots started because it came out of law enforcement's budget, and they now work all together. I think that's really important, and that's something that we can do throughout Colorado.
Is that something that is on the table right now and something that that's being, like you said, a pilot, or are we still having conversations and bringing the stakeholders together? Where are we with that?
We piloted in Denver and we launched in June. And so doing that work with law enforcement to actually launch it here, another reason, again, why 217 passed was because, I had law enforcement officers helping me to craft the bill, but really thinking about what law enforcement could look differently. How can we reimagine this? How can we not just say we're going to build more jails, but really get the
Yeah.
community services that they need. And so that was really helpful. So I actually do think that there are some well-meaning officers who are very interested in this work, especially when you go to the sheriff or the chief level. You see a lot of folks who are willing to do the work. Now, they might not want the state legislature to tell them how to do it, but they want to do the work. They won't be impacted by 217, right? 217 is really for those bad law enforcement officers that need to go. And then together we can reimagine what policing in our community looks like. And that's what we need to do.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Senator Gonzalez, do you have anything to add?
I was just looking up, as Representative Herod was speaking, I was looking up how much our state budget, nearly 10%, it's I believe 7.3 on corrections, percent of our general fund is, of a $30 billion general fund, is spent directly on corrections, and another chunk is spent on judicial. I wasn't able to pull those numbers, but it's a significant portion of our state budget, right? And I'm really interested in the ways in which that officer discretion as to whether or not to make an arrest or to issue a citation, right? Because in a traffic stop at the very beginning, an officer oftentimes has that discretion to say, here's a ticket, either here's a fine, or we'll see you in court, or what have you, or to make an arrest. And then say a person is arrested, right? The county is then paying that time that person is incarcerated, and whether or not they're able to make it out on bond, right? That's another question. How often, how long before they seek private counsel or find a public defender, right? And then the time of the prosecution of that case. And then we're looking at the costs of potential incarceration or probation or what have you, or parole, and all of those things add up in costs. And as Representative Herod was talking about, right, lots of questions that we should be asking ourselves systemically as to, was that a call that a police should be called to in the first place, or was that a call that a mental health individual or a paramedic should be responding to, right? And that's some of the work that we in the legislature need to further address and further refine. The question becomes, how do we make this work across different communities, right? Knowing that Denver is a different world in a lot of ways than Huerfano County, where my family's from, down in Southern Colorado, or
Johnstown.
Yeah, exactly. Or Johnstown, or, Fort Collins or Greeley or what have you, right? And all of those communities are navigating different sets of relationships with their local law enforcement and with their communities. And so part of our work is to say, okay, well, what can we do to make sure that everyone across the state has an equal baseline treatment, regardless of their race, regardless of their income, regardless of their ability to retain counsel, right? Let us remember that people are innocent until proven guilty, but a lot of times our criminal justice system doesn't always treat people, in that way, right? And so how do we strive for a more just system? And so knowing that at the end of the day, a tremendous amount of our budget is dedicated to that corrections and judicial line items, right? And so that's our work, and that's when people are asking, okay, well, just abolish the police or defund the police or what have you. Where do we then allocate the dollars? How do we ensure that people are being treated with dignity and respect? And whether that is mental health, whether that is substance abuse, whether that is other types of harms that need to be addressed, whether it's homelessness or what have you. Those dollars need to be allocated in thoughtful and intentional ways.
Yes, thank you. Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez.
Yeah, I won't add much more because I think these two have covered it really well. But it's divesting and then reinvesting, and I think that's what Senator Gonzalez is talking about is where do you reinvest those dollars? And you look at the state budget, but then you also look at locally how much local governments are funding, the Department of Safety, for instance, and what that all entails. I look at this, similar to what Representative Harrod was talking about in the child welfare system. There has been a long history of, putting kids into out-of-home placement or kids that have mental health needs ending up in congregate care, which are the highest level of care. And our state has actually taken a very proactive steps in actually reinvesting their funds to more preventative type measures and care. And when we talk about being able to access services without having to become system involved, accessing services without having to have law enforcement, be called, because I can tell you when I was a caseworker, 12 years ago, and we had families who were struggling with their child who had mental health issues and were having these outbursts, whether they were suicidal, homicidal, and the family couldn't calm them down. We were instructed to instruct them to call who? The police. And that was so that they can be put on a 72-hour hold and so they can access inpatient psychiatric care. And that just is so backwards, right? That we're calling the police so that they can intervene in a mental health crisis. And so I'm really excited.
It's also scary. It makes it even more terrifying.
I've had my own family members, unfortunately, who have had to use that measure in order to access those kinds of resources. And so I'm really happy that on the child welfare, juvenile front, that there has already started to be a lot of changes in that area and how those situations are being handled and how we're getting access to services and resources before even involving sometimes child welfare, right? Which is a whole other system of itself.
Yeah.
I see that kind of that crosswalk there and how those systems kind of, move in with one another and we're building off of one another. And so I'm really happy that we're in a place that we are having these conversations and trying to make some progress in those areas.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I completely agree with you. Absolutely. I think that I have several friends that work in healthcare, and when a person is going through a crisis and they are met with with a policeman with a gun, and it just makes it even more terrifying. And then they're put in the 72-hour hold. I mean, they're going to rethink, I don't want to be there again. Right? So how are we going to get these people the care that they need if they're terrified to take those steps? So I agree. We need to figure out a different way. Absolutely. So
yeah,
I want to
add one thing to that is when we came back after COVID and we saw the budgets were getting cut everywhere, we were told, and I know a lot of local governments and people were told across the country, right? Well, we're going to have to cut budgets and it's really going to hurt. It's going to be, deep cuts. They're going to have to cut things that Democrats don't want to cut. It's going to be pretty bad, but don't cut corrections or Department of Public Safety. Can't cut there, And that's actually not true, but that's why even through these recessions, our law enforcement budgets have just grown. And so I see Michelle in the chat, and I just want to acknowledge, you specifically, Michelle, because, I understand that there are folks who do not want law enforcement involved at all in the communities. And most of the time, not all, well, I might say all, it's because of direct personal relationships and experiences that they've had. And so it is not okay that kids now are facing the same things that you did when you were in crisis as a teen, but even more so, it's worse, it's worse than it used to be, especially in our schools. I'm thinking about when I was growing up. So my mom was in the military, and I was new every 2 years to a school. I talked different. I learned different. Like I was dressed different. I was just not a part, and so I got in fights, right? But because I normally was on military bases, if not, I was at a school that was tied to a military base. My mom got called, or her commanding officer got called when something happened at school. And we had to, like normal, like I think most people, we had to deal with it at home. Now, I think if I were in school nowadays, I would be definitely in the school to prison pipeline, told that I can't be anything, definitely, well, who knows what could happen. But I will say that my sister has been in and out of the criminal justice system for about 30 years, and she's 16 years older than me. Oops, sorry, Kim, I'm not supposed to say that. But anyway, she's a little bit older than me. But I know that the outcomes would have been very different, very, very different if I were growing up now and if my mom wasn't tied to that kind of the military, which actually made it so that you didn't want an officer's child to be arrested, right? Like you handled it through the commanding officer, we got in trouble and all of that. And quite frankly, I don't understand why things can't happen the way that they used to when normal teenage behavior was taken care of in the home, taken care of in the community, right? Where folks were like, we got to straighten this out. Like y'all got to sit down and talk about it. I actually made some of my closest friends through those moments because as kids, that's how you learn and grow sometimes. So anyways, that's just a side note, but I just want to acknowledge what Michelle's saying. And I think we have to work together. So it's not just about working with law enforcement. And that's why I want to acknowledge the abolitionists. It's about working with all of us at the table, all of our diverse ideas to come up with good policy. And just because something is working in Denver does not mean it can't work in Weld. Larimer County and Longmont are doing some amazing things that were based off of things that cities did. Eugene, Oregon is nothing like Denver, nothing like Denver. But we're still able to put some common sense policies into practice. Having a non-law enforcement response when you call 911 works in every county, okay? It can work in every single area of the state of Colorado. We just need to actually invest in it.
And I also think that we have to keep having these conversations, right? Because unless we continue to have the conversations in these different areas, we won't ever know, right? We won't know if that'll work or not, or even we can contemplate that. So I really think that this is the first of many, right? There's so many things I want to talk about tonight, and we're not going to be able to get to them. So we'll have to have another one. But I just want to stay on topic then. I wanted to go into all of these other disparities and inequities, but that's we'll have to save that for another event. So I want to see about what, if we have any questions. Let's see. What was the bill that Representative Sane introduced or was passed? Do you know what that is, Jen? You'll have to remind us what bill that is.
She worked on the forfeiture bill in 15. And yeah, I just remember speaking to her about it because we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I was like, I really like that bill.
You're trying to find common ground. I love it.
You never know when you can find that common ground. Representative Sane actually also came down and supported the parolee voting bill, which I was also surprised about, and 100% agree with her support on that. I know, look at that, like what? But she did, so there you go.
So Jerry was saying that we should probably think about defunding the military grade weaponry. I agree with that. Demilitarizing our law enforcement. I think that, that would be a great step moving forward. Am I right? And then the other thing too, I think when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, because that's something near and dear to me, I have been working on equity, for many years. I've lived in North Carolina and New Mexico, and I came back to Colorado. But even on the East Coast, right? I grew up in New Jersey. So, I mean, it's a big issue. And I think that when we have these conversations, we have to think about, how are we supporting these individuals, these students? Because I think the easy way out is to suspend them or put them in a room by themselves. And to me, they're not learning. How are they going to get ahead, right? Or they end up, they're out of school, they get into more trouble, what have you. And then here you go, right? They're in detention. They're you know. So I would like to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'll just pick up on that and say that this past summer, so, you know, we have our 120-day legislative session. This year it was a little bit weird thanks to COVID. Yeah. But then this past summer we had interim committees, which are basically the legislative equivalent of summer school for lawmakers. And we'll go deep dive into a topic. And I sat on 2 different committees, one being prison population management interim committee alongside Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez and Representative Herod, as well as school safety. And although Representative Young wasn't a member, I think you were at every single one of those meetings as well, because it was a really important topic to so many of us, right? And so what was really interesting after sitting on both of those committees is that I really came away with a stronger understanding of the ways in which we actually do fund mental health programs. We just fund them in our correction system, right? We don't actually fund them early on with young kids, teaching them how to navigate emotions, teaching them how to navigate anger or frustration or fear or sadness or what have you. And then when young people don't have good outlets to navigate those emotions, that they either bottle up and then explode, or they act out and get in fights, or quite honestly, what we end up seeing right here in Colorado is that we have one of the highest suicide rates for young people in the country, right? And so when we're talking about another place where we can, again, reallocate dollars in a thoughtful and intentional way, right? To me, it is how do we reduce our prison population in a thoughtful manner so that we can free up dollars to be able to fund things like those data-driven programs for elementary and middle and high school students that we know that reduce bullying, reduce suicidality, things of that nature, right? A. B, we have a whole other set of challenges to address to ensure educational justice and educational equity for all students, to close the achievement gap between students of color and their white counterparts. There's a lot of work to do there. And Representative Gonzales-Gutierrez and Representative Boccella and I partnered on a bill last year to teach young people and actually create a commission that would then build out a curriculum that social studies teachers could use and civics teachers could use to teach the contributions of diverse Coloradans and diverse Americans, LGBT folks, people of color, so that people can then see themselves reflected in their history as hopefully just one other step to be able to take to create that equity that we're all hoping to see within our educational system.
Completely agree with you. Representative?
Yeah. Yeah, this is like the thick of my other job because I still have my other job. And I have to say that, you know, we see kids enter at the stage of truancy, for instance, right? Yes. And that's like the very tip of the iceberg of, you know, they aren't going to school. And the reasons that they're not going to school can be for a variety of reasons. It could be an economic issue. It can be transportation. It can be housing. And, you know, there's a variety of reasons. It could be that there are maybe bullying situations at school, or maybe a safety reason, you know, whether it's gang involved or other reasons. And so then they are then being introduced into this court system through truancy, and it's not just on them, it's also on their parents. But when they become a teenager, then it is more the responsibility on them and the reason that they are not going to school. And what we see happen is this trajectory of something starting as not going to school, then snowballing into picking up a charge. Maybe it's a municipal ticket, but maybe it's a state charge, and they're maybe being arrested, and now they're going into detention, and then they're facing possibly commitment to the Division of Youth Services. And so and unfortunately, that there are some of those young people who move up into the adult system, and that is the pipeline, right? Is that you start something that is truancy, something that could have maybe been worked on at that moment in time had those services been available. And that goes back to exactly what I was talking about earlier when it comes to investing in on the front end. Maybe it's not, there's different types of prevention. There's primary prevention, then there's the secondary. And this is kind of that secondary bucket where you're trying to prevent the further things from happening. And so I can say proudly, like in Denver, I know we don't have the best of the best, and we're working on it. But one of the things that we have invested in is providing more of those upfront services that you would not get unless you become involved with child welfare. We actually try to provide them before they become involved, so that we don't have to ask child welfare to provide the services and the funding. In fact, Denver Human Services provides funding to actually the program that I run, so that we can prevent kids from going into their system, which then can put them at risk of going into out-of-home placement, into congregate care, or picking up more charges. And so it is a snowball effect.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect. Right. So how can we as legislators, what kind of policy, what does that look like? I mean, we've got 3 amazing legislators here. What does that look like? What is something that we can start having these conversations and get the conversation going, and, getting that bipartisan support? What does that look like in our communities?
Well, first off, I am going to say that we do need to make sure that we elect Sally Boccella to the state Senate. I'm just going to be front and center about that. I need more Democratic allies and colleagues at the state capitol to be thoughtful, to be intentional, and to be able to help us craft those solutions by bringing forward that Northern Colorado perspective. We need more of that. And so I love the fact that this conversation is happening. I also want you all to support her in her campaign and hook a sister up with a donation, because that's going to be in a COVID world, honestly, like where we're not going to be able to knock doors. It's going to be even more important to send mailers, to make phone calls, and those things cost money. And so hook her up if you're not already a monthly contributor. I committed earlier today to be a monthly contributor, and so I hope y'all join me in that, because that is going to be as important as everything else as we continue to work forward to these solutions. So that being said, I'll turn it over to other folks to talk about the policies, but I just want to be sure to make that plug.
Thank you so much.
I support everything Senator Gonzalez said. We do need to have more allies, but I'll say as state legislators, it's just really important that we're bold and that our communities support our boldness. We wouldn't even have the prison population management group if I wouldn't have stepped up and said, I want to have this committee, because we do need to start thinking about reducing the prison population. Like the answer of there's just not enough money is not accurate. It's not accurate. There is enough money. We just have to rethink about how we do it. And we found through COVID times that we actually don't need to incarcerate everyone, because they're not taking people, and it's not the end of the world. So we know what it looks like. It's like now, and we just don't need to just go back to filling them up. And so we have to have people who are willing to do bold policy. We have to have folks who are willing to say, I want a bill and I'm going to run this bill. And that's what it's going to look like, and yes, we will have conversations through it. That's our jobs. But at the same time, we're not going to shy away from issues just because we think they might be unelectable. one thing that I think 217 showed us was that as a Democratic caucus, we all have a role to play in reform, all of us, right? And everyone took a role, whether it was negotiating with their own sheriff. I mean, at least in the House was what I loved about it. Whether it was negotiating with their own sheriff or talking to their communities, like everyone had a role. And I assume it's happened in the Senate too, because it was just so amazing how things really came together. So I would say, one, we have to be bold, and two, our communities need to step up, stand up, and support us too, but also tell us what they want to see. It's just as important for me to negotiate with Serena as it is for me to negotiate with someone who's my constituent and get there, you know? That's so important. And so, again, I go back to Michelle, who's really pushing us, right, to push harder and do more, right? And I can feel that. And it's not enough. It's not enough. We're not done. It's not over. We have so much more to do. So everyone, please stay at the table, but make sure that Sally's elected, because we do need to make sure that we have listening voices there. So,
well, I
so
have a question from Facebook.
And we're having very tough conversations. Thank you.
Oh, and that's the thing, right? Is that, I mean, I was part of a study circle on the East Coast. It was in North Carolina. And that was one of the things that really resonated with me, was we have to have these challenging conversations. They may be awkward. They may be, you know, like all these things come up, right? For all different kinds of people. And it's okay. It should be a safe space where we are able to talk, because we're never going to get past these things unless we have these conversations. And so that's, you know, it's so critical. We have a question from Facebook. Will there be an evaluation component of the bill for 217? And how do we know if these reforms are working?
So again, this is just one bill. There's so many others that need to happen and that have happened. But yeah, there'll be, we'll be able to measure the efficacy, because we'll know how many, you know, settlements are paid out, right? And then we also have a public database component, so we know that. But no, it's not going to solve all issues when it comes to law enforcement related interactions and officer misconduct, but hopefully it puts us in the right direction. And, you know, quite frankly, we do have evaluation on most bills. It's every year, right? Every year, people are coming back with either new ideas for a bill, how to tweak a bill. So it doesn't have to be like an independent evaluator coming in. Really, it's just about what laws do we need to change and tweak. That's why we come back every single year, because we're always tweaking laws. We're always changing statute. And that's again, our job. And so that's a piece of it. And I guarantee you, if something's not working, we will hear from it in the Judiciary Committee ASAP. And I'm sorry, I do have to jump off for 7 o'clock, but thank you again so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. You really elevated the conversation. So thank you.
Everyone.
And we'll have to do this again. There's so much more to discuss. Bye.
Thanks.
I will. I'll let you know. Does anyone else have any other questions? Put it in the chat real quick, because we are at 7 o'clock. We don't really see any questions. Julie and Serena, can you see the chat?
Yeah, I don't see any questions, but what I do see are a lot of ideas. And so what I hope is, I see Erica, Michelle, I think Jerry was chiming in there. You know, any ideas or, you know, thoughts that you have, because we don't know everything, right? If we knew everything, I'd be on Jeopardy, or on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or something. So true. And so, you know, we don't know everything about everything. And so anything that you have an idea about, like, reach out to us, because I think it's important to hear from constituents. It's important to hear from the community, because we don't know everything. And I think it was mentioned earlier, I think Senator Gonzalez mentioned it, is around lived experience. It's not just about what you went to school for and, you know, what you're a professional in or whatever. It's also about your own lived experience, and that does help shape policy also. And the last thing I want to add, as far as like what we need, yes, we need Sally, but we also, you know, with that, we need trust. And I think that was a huge piece of also of 217, is that we had a real dialogue and a real conversation about what was happening in our communities, what was happening to people of color, and how it's been happening for a very long time. And I think our colleagues said, okay, like, we trust you, we're hearing you, and they came along, and they were there every step of the way. And I think that is what we need, and that is what, you know, why we need Sally, because we need more people like that to bring that to the table and to tell us, you know, when we're working on tough issues, that we're not just making it up, that it's not just in our heads. It is, these are things that are actually happening.
And not just in certain areas, right? I mean, yeah. And and just to piggyback on the trust, I think it's so important too. I mean, I've sat on several different discussions in regards to this issue, and you know, I love how we're all talking in different groups. And you know, one of the things that really resonated for me too, when we talk about the school to prison pipeline and about having like, you know, resource officers in our schools and even police, you know, one of the gentlemen, and you both know him, is AJ, very thoughtful young man. And, you know, I remember him saying on one of these, that because we have officers that are stationed at our middle school and high school, but they are there. Our students know them. Our students trust them. They have a rapport. You know what I mean? Like there's a rapport, and that's missing, I think, too. You know, if you're going to have somebody in your schools, like he mentioned, it's a different person. It's like a revolving door, right? And the thing is how are you going to build trust? How is a student going to feel safe going to that person, that officer, and saying, hey, I need your help, and not have to worry that he's going to get carted off, right? When he really was just asking for help. And so I think it's important, you know, about that trust and about building relationships. And I think this bill will really help take the steps forward for community to put their trust in law enforcement. And like I said, you know, it calls out the people that are not walking in integrity, because they take an oath, and it should not be abused. And it's just like in any other industry, any other profession, right? If a doctor does something that's criminal, they will be charged. They are liable. They are held accountable. And so when I see something like this, it's not saying all law enforcement are bad. We're not saying that. We're saying that, you know, this is a calling for you. And, you know, the officers that don't walk in integrity, they need to be called out, and they need to be held accountable so that others don't do those things, right? And we shouldn't be profiling certain groups of people. It should be across the board, whatever the law is, whatever it is, that is what is, that's what's enforced, right? Not profiling people. And I do think it starts in our schools. I absolutely do. I do think there's so many different facets to this. I would love to invite you both back to do another town hall, and maybe we talk about education equity, right? And we talk about, you know, the resource officers that are in our schools, and just, I don't know. I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. So if anyone has any thank you. If anyone has any follow-up questions tonight on what we talked about, please send them to me via email at Sally. I'll put it in the chat. Sally at sallyforcolorado.com. And I will make sure that these three amazing women get your questions, and they can follow up with those answers. Because I'm sure that there's so many questions that we still want to ask, and we just maybe didn't think of them right now because we only have an hour. As Julie said, Senator Gonzalez said, this is a subject that is multifaceted, and we could go on and on and on.
Yeah, I just
So
want to thank you all so much for creating the space. We didn't even talk about the ways in which immigrants navigate
Yes.
the criminal justice system, navigate fear and fear to, quite frankly, even report crimes when they're victims or witnesses to crime. And so there's so much more. And Sally, I just really, really appreciate you creating the space. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great rest of your evening.
Goodbye.